You have heard the name before. Kraken, a monster so vast it could wrap its arms around a warship and pull it to the bottom of the sea. For over 1,000 years, sailors from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean swore they had seen it. Massive tentacles rising from black water, a body the size of an island, an eye the size of a dinner plate staring up from the deep. And for just as long, the people who stayed on land called them liars. But here is the thing nobody expected. The Kraken was real, not a metaphor, not a fevered dream, not a drunken exaggeration on a rocking deck. A real animal living in the real ocean, so strange and so enormous that when science finally found it, the people who had spent centuries denying it could not believe what they were looking at. The earliest detailed written account of what would become the Kraken legend comes from around 1250 AD in an old Norse text called the Konungs Skuggja, or the King's Mirror. It was a manual for Norwegian merchants, and somewhere between advice on trade routes and herring fishing, the author described something unsettling. A creature so large that its arms, which the text called horns, could reach the top of a ship's mast. When it dove, it created a whirlpool. You can imagine a medieval fisherman reading that passage and deciding to stay closer to shore. 300 years later, the stories had not faded. If anything, they had grown. Olaus Magnus, a Swedish Catholic archbishop, published his Carta Marina in 1539. It was a massive map of Scandinavia, and in the waters between Norway and Iceland, he drew the creature explicitly. A many-armed beast pulling a ship apart, sailors tumbling into the waves. His written descriptions called it the Feister and said it was so enormous that it was sometimes mistaken for an island. Ships would anchor on its back, the creature would dive, and that would be the end of those sailors. But here is what is interesting. Olaus Magnus was not just telling ghost stories. He was cataloging what his world's mariners reported, and they were all describing the same thing: a colossal, tentacled creature in the deep North Atlantic. By the 1700s, the most respected natural historians in Europe were willing to put their names behind the accounts. Erik Pontoppidan, the Bishop of Bergen in Norway, published his Natural History of Norway in 1752. He described the Kraken with the calm precision of a scientist. He said its back was 1.5 miles in circumference. He said it had arms so numerous and so long that they could pull down the largest man-o-war. He called it the Kraken, and he treated its existence as settled fact. Even Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern taxonomy, the man who invented the system we still use to name every living species, listed the Kraken in the early editions of his Systema Naturae. He called it microcosmos. The classification was later removed, probably under pressure from skeptical colleagues. But the fact remains. The man who named every creature on Earth once believed the Kraken was real enough to classify. And then, almost overnight, the Kraken vanished from science. The 19th century brought a new kind of zoologist, one who trusted only what could be brought back to a museum, preserved in alcohol, pinned to a board. No one had ever hauled a Kraken specimen onto a dock. Sailors kept reporting them, but without a body on a slab, the accounts were dismissed as myth, exaggeration, or confusion with whales. By the early 1900s, the Kraken was firmly in the category of legend, a fairy tale for children. A metaphor for something large and dangerous, but not real. Except that it was. The animal behind the Kraken legend is Architeuthis dux, the giant squid, and for decades after it was dismissed from science, pieces of it kept washing ashore. A tentacle here, a mantle there, entire carcasses tangled in fishing nets off the coasts of Norway, Newfoundland, New Zealand, and Japan. Scientists measured them. They cataloged the beaks, hard, black, parrot-like structures found in the stomachs of sperm whales. They counted the sucker marks, some as large as teacup saucers, scarred into the skin of whale after whale that washed ashore. The evidence was everywhere, but nobody had ever seen one alive. The giant squid lives in the deep ocean, between 300 and 1,000 meters below the surface. That is a world of permanent darkness, crushing pressure, and near-freezing temperatures. It is harder to reach than the surface of Mars. More people have walked on the moon than have seen a living giant squid in its habitat, and that is precisely why it took so long to prove it existed. The breakthrough came in September 2004. Tsunemi Kubodra, a researcher at Japan's National Science Museum, and Kyoichi Mori, a whale researcher, had spent years deploying camera rigs in the deep waters off the Ogasawara Islands south of Tokyo. They suspended bait, a squid jig attached to a long line, and waited with an automated camera. On September 30th, at a depth of about 900 meters, something attacked the bait. The camera captured a series of photographs showing a giant squid, estimated at about 8 meters long, wrapped around the line, its tentacles coiled, its single enormous eye catching the light. It was the first photograph of a living giant squid in the deep ocean. The image traveled around the world. But one photograph was not enough for some skeptics. The images were grainy. The squid was tangled in gear. Maybe it was injured, disoriented, not representative of the animal in its true element. The scientific community wanted more. In 2012, Edith Witter, a deep-sea biologist and ocean explorer, joined a team led by Kubodra that set out to do what no one had done before: film a giant squid behaving naturally in the deep ocean. Witter had spent years studying bioluminescence, the ability of deep-sea creatures to produce their own light. She designed a camera system called the Medusa, which used a special optical lure that mimicked the bioluminescent pulse of a jellyfish, a known food source for large deep-sea predators. The device was lowered into the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, near the site where a giant squid tentacle had been recovered from a sperm whale's stomach years before. On the first night, something appeared in front of the camera, a pale, ghostly shape rising from the darkness. Its arms were extended. Its two long, feeding tentacles were coiled and ready, and then it struck. The giant squid launched itself at the lure, wrapping its tentacles around the light in a burst of movement. Witter and her team, watching the footage from the surface, erupted. It was the first time a giant squid had been filmed in its natural habitat, behaving as it actually behaves: a silent ambush predator of the deep ocean. The footage aired on the Discovery Channel in January 2013, narrated by Sir David Attenborough, and once again, the image of the Kraken moved around the world. Now here is where the story gets uncomfortable for the skeptics. The giant squid that Witter filmed was about 3 to 4 meters long. A juvenile, adult giant squid have been measured at up to 13 meters or about 43 feet. That is longer than most city buses, and that is just Architeuthis ducks. There is a second species, Mesonichotuthis hamiltoni, the colossal squid, discovered in 1925 when 2 tentacles were found in the stomach of a sperm whale near Antarctica. The colossal squid is thought to be even larger, with swiveling hooks on its tentacle clubs that can rotate 360 degrees. Only a handful of intact colossal squid specimens have ever been recovered. The largest, pulled from Antarctic waters in 2007, measured about 10 meters and weighed nearly 500 kilograms. So when medieval sailors said they saw a creature in the deep ocean with arms as long as ship masts and an appetite for destruction, what were they actually seeing? Most likely, they were encountering the occasional giant squid that ventured too close to the surface, or carcasses floating after battles with sperm whales. A dead or dying giant squid, its tentacles trailing in the current, its body bobbing like a pale island, would look exactly like the Kraken described in the King's Mirror. And the whirlpool effect? Sperm whales, the giant squid's primary predator, feed by diving to extreme depths and then surfacing rapidly. When a whale breaches or a pod feeds near the surface, the turbulence creates circular currents that a medieval sailor, already terrified, could easily interpret as a monster pulling itself downward. Here is the counterintuitive part of this story. The real animal is arguably more terrifying than the myth. The Kraken of legend was large and destructive, but it was also described as slow, visible, and avoidable. You could see it coming. The real giant squid is the opposite. It is silent. It is invisible. It lives in a world we cannot enter without machines. Its eye, the largest eye in the animal kingdom at up to 27 centimeters across, roughly the size of a dinner plate, evolved specifically to detect the faintest bioluminescent glow in total darkness. It hunts by feel, using 2 ultra-long feeding tentacles studded with razor-toothed suckers that can lash out faster than the human eye can track. When a sperm whale and a giant squid fight, the evidence is written on the whale's body. Round scars, some the size of softballs, carved into skin that is itself several inches thick. These are not gentle creatures. The ancient myth of the Kraken was a story about fear of the unknown ocean. The reality of the giant squid is proof that the fear was justified. There were always monsters down there. We just did not have the technology to see them. And that is the part that should stay with you. Not the squid itself, but the pattern. For centuries, sailors described something real, and centuries of educated, rational people called them fools. Not because the evidence was missing, but because the evidence did not fit the categories those people were willing to accept. The Kraken was dismissed not because it was impossible, but because the people in charge had already decided what was possible. How many other things do we dismiss today because they do not fit our categories? How many witnesses are being ignored right now, not because they are wrong, but because the people listening have already decided what the world contains? The Kraken was a fairy tale until it was an animal. It was a metaphor until it was a photograph. The deep ocean did not get less mysterious. We just got humble enough to look.